was completed when I was 17. I occasionally dove with two high school friends. Corona del Mar, California, was our diving beach. My mother was worried when I went diving. She told me to stop diving and quit the pastime. Being 17 makes you feel eternal. So I said, "Okay, Mom, don't worry." We started diving like everyone else. We were cautious, never dipped deeper than 20 to 60 feet, and always had Richard, Ricky, and me. I could not draw air from my regulator, thus my primary oxygen had failed. I gave up after struggling. My air reserve valve and 40 feet of water made it fine. I pulled the reserve wire, took a large inhale, and then had no air. My reserve failed. Actually, I couldn't tell you today if the air or regulator malfunctioned. Not an expert scuba diver then or today. I fell behind Richard and Ricky due to the major air supply issue. I became scared. I had already exhaled, so a free ascent didn't seem wise. Free ascension was my weakest element in diving certification, as mentioned in my final exam. I tried to gain Richard and Ricky's attention, but failed. We had been joking about, so they must have believed I was trying to lure them close for another mask-slapping round. I gave them the underwater sign for out of air. They replied with their middle fingers, and I floated helplessly, hoping they would give me air. They didn't coming, so I focused on keeping my regulator in my mouth before passing out. I knew the time of blacking out was coming, and I was frightened that this was it for me at 17 with so much to live for. I was afraid, and I worried of how disappointed my parents would be, especially my mom, who never enjoyed scuba diving and gave me trouble about it today. Through the years, I've learned to appreciate my tight psychological relationship with my mother. I recall being scared and anxious before blacking out. Euphoria hit me milliseconds before I blacked out. I had no fear or discomfort. I felt free and pleased. Very strange. I then glanced down at our gear, icebox, and possessions from above the shore. I could see our dive buoy in the sea beyond the breakers. I knew Richard and Ricky were submerged. I felt alive and well. The only item missing was my diving gear, which worried me because we rented it and had to pay for any problems. However, this calmness would take over and make me worry-free whenever I worried. I still dread heights, so my focus immediately switched from losing my diving gear to flying and floating again. This tranquility, which I felt before losing consciousness, took over. I looked around and saw that I was moving northwest, so I started paying close attention to what was happening to me. Whether I was entire, spirit, or anything else is unknown. I felt complete in my body. Wearing my diving watch, I realized I could control my flight and halt when I focused. My fear of heights would make me tremble if I stopped too long. I expected to fall from the skies. When I stopped thinking about being stopped, I started moving like someone was in charge. I felt extremely carefree and worry-free. Every time I was terrified, instant bliss replaced it. It felt great. I noticed my path will lead me back home. I vividly recall hovering above Disneyland in Knott's Berry Farm. Very strange. I felt guided by an unseen power. Nobody was visible, just the dirt and sky to the horizon. I chose to estimate my distance by measuring the distance between ground features with my eyes, then timing the second hand on my watch. Unsure why I did this. I just had the sensation, and it seemed sensible given what was happening. This would have been an imperfect measurement, but it seemed necessary. Well, I quickly realized that I couldn't eyeball the ground for distance measures, so I got upset. I observed before giving up the project, and I could feel it, and concluded that by chance, I noted that my watch always ticked seconds linearly when I was trying to eyeball distances by looking at ground features and timing them with my watch. However, ground distance changed. Distances varied, some recurring, some not. My speed fluctuated, but my watch did not. That strong sense that accompanied me throughout this event made me think something was wrong. I tried to be afraid but failed. It didn't stick. I wasn't surprised when I arrived my city from the southeast. This was the headline. I was on since leaving the beach. I floated over my home, yearning to drop down and walk in, but couldn't. Since I had been doing it since the adventure began, I stopped. I floated above my home. I sensed my mother in the kitchen. I knew where she was. She seemed burdened with grief and frightened about something, but I couldn't figure out why. I vibrated again, relaxed, and moved again for fear of falling out of the sky and through my house's roof. I noticed that my trajectory from the beach changed from northwest to northerly and east. I took in every element of this experience, feeling it, observing it, and remembering it. One look in the new direction revealed Rose Hill Cemetery in Whittier, California. Since I was flying, I immediately knew I would cross the cemetery if I continued on this new trajectory. From the south, I entered the cemetery. A mysterious force halted me, surprising me. I thought all the stops had been started by me when I focused on stopping. I had a strong feeling that my views and conclusions were true. I looked down and saw that I was above my family's burial places, which my grandfather and great-grandmother had previously occupied. My family had additional empty burial grounds. A voice replied, "What do you think about what is going on down there?" And this man appeared on the horizon in front of me. Only his head showed. His massive mustache looked Hispanic. He talked, and I saw his mouth move. He faded from transparent to semi-transparent to almost solid, but never solid. I felt he was directing me from the beach to my house to the graveyard and preventing me from falling out of the sky. He's become my guide over time. He said again, "What do you think about what is going on down there?" I looked down again, but I didn't expect to see anything new as I had been looking at the family graves for a long time before the guide emerged and started talking to me. I knew there was a funeral down there this time, but it wasn't there a second ago. I was too high to see what was happening below me. I could see the casket, but not anyone. Therefore, it was a funeral. First time. I saw folks on the ground throughout the trip. I asked the guide, "Can you get me any closer so I can see the people better?" He politely said no, forcing me to look down and figure it out myself. I remember watching those closest to the casket. When a woman held by a man broke free, she threw herself onto the casket and said things a mother would say when her only son dies at 17. The whole event got sad and serious. I tried to be disappointed and shocked, but I couldn't get sad or worried, which helped me a lot because I would have freaked out otherwise. I asked the guide, "That is my funeral, isn't it?" He said, "Yes." I looked down and saw my friends in the cars. Many friends attended. Mom and Dad were at my casket. Next to my casket were my younger sister and her boyfriend. My future bride was also nearby. I would have been depressed if I could, but I felt no misery, hate, pain, or fear. I was fine with everything I saw and felt. If we all felt that way, the world would be special. After that, the guide said, "You have to decide if you want to go or come with us." But I was too busy feeling my funeral to feel anything. The guide repeated, "You have to decide if you want to go or come with us." Despite not feeling fear, I was snippy with the guide. I snapped at him, "You have said that twice now. You have used the word us twice, and it is just you and me here. What do you mean when you say us?" At that moment, a land appears behind the guide. A breathtaking land I've never seen. I've traveled the world, but I've never seen plants and trees glow like this. A tropical jungle was beautiful. Birds with 3 tails flew by. Unlike those on Earth, I saw strange plants and trees. It was peaceful, bright, and beautiful. Everything was vibrant. I was beginning to grasp the situation. I now realize I'm not seeing or experiencing anything earthly. I resumed observing. The moment this land appeared, a deep canyon separated it. My guide and I were on one side, this tropical paradise on the other. I worried that this place was calling my cells to cross the canyon. It felt more like my atoms were being drawn here. I instinctively knew I couldn't return if I crossed the crevasse. My entire being was drawn to this place. I desperately wanted to go, but I knew I couldn't return. I considered how crossing would affect my sister, parents, girlfriend, and friends. I considered never having kids. At 17, I wanted to experience more of life, so I focused on not letting any atom or cell cross the divide. Yet I had this easy feeling that I belonged there, that I was from there, that this was my home, and that everything came from there, seen and unseen. I wanted to go there, but crossing the divide had consequences. My intuition was my only guide throughout this experience, but I always felt like I had been there before. The guide repeated, "You have to decide if you want to go or come with us." I asked, "Why do you keep saying us?" It is just the two of us here. A man descends from the sky from behind this magnificent land as if on invisible stairs. I could see him descending, but he never touched the ground. I thought he floated and never touched the ground. I noticed that he was solid, unlike my guide, and his movement seemed unnatural. Seeing through him was impossible. I struggled to understand this experience and figure things out slowly, but I quickly figured out who just walked down from the sky. Jesus Christ, whom I now call Divinity, tried to keep it non-denominational. I knew because I just knew. He resembled all the earth pictures I had seen of him, but not exactly. It's amazing to see Jesus Christ, the Son of God, on earth. His long robe was blue. He was slim and handsomer than his earthly pictures showed. His hair was long, but not too long, loose, curly, and golden blonde. One look made him feel like your father and family. My cells and atoms wanted to fly there and hug him, but crossing that canyon would be permanent. My instincts prevented me from crossing the canyon. I knew the consequences. I wanted to have options, if any. Over the past 33 years, I've often considered jumping at the chance again. I've often wondered, why didn't you go for it, dude? You missed the journey of a lifetime. It seemed like we stared at each other for hours. In the first moment I saw him, I knew he knew my past, present, and future. I felt worthless or mundane. I sensed I couldn't tell this being anything new. I sensed him in my head. It felt like his thoughts were slightly ahead of everything. I wanted to go with him, but was already making excuses. It was like they said on Earth, he was all-knowing, all-seeing, and you could feel it. I felt bad because I could feel him in my head and perceive him in any way of thought. However, he appeared relaxed and forgiving. I felt many things as we stared at each other. Jesus said, "You must decide if you're coming with us or would like to go back." Then I realized the most amazing thing in my life. He was speaking directly into my head without moving his lips. I could feel it leaving his head and entering mine. My ears were never used when talking to him. I was amazed that I was telepathically communicating with this being. It amazed me and made me feel unique and special. For some reason, it felt natural to me, and I wondered why I couldn't do this before. He seemed to know what I was going to say before I did. My telepathic attempts to communicate with Jesus were comical. My mouth always moved and made sounds, but I understood the concept, which I thought humans couldn't do. I still felt human. I gave good reasons why I didn't want to go with them, and why I wanted to go back, being respectful and trying not to hurt anyone. He said, "I knew you would make that decision." He nodded and smiled at me, surprising me. I floated there instinctively, waiting to be sent back. Jesus spoke again in my head, not ears. He said, "I have work to do through you one day." I said, "Anytime, I will do anything you ask." He said, "You will have a long life." I said, "Thank you." As he turned away, I noticed he didn't touch the ground again. Boom, I was back in the water with Richard and Ricky, so close, looking terrified. I could prise their regulators from their mouths and breathe. We then shared air and rose to the surface. I lay on the beach, blown away by what had happened, in disbelief, emotionally moved but calm, and grateful to be alive. I asked Richard and Ricky what happened, and they said they turned around to get me because I had fallen behind them. They told me I changed colors after they returned. I went from light brown to blue, deep blue, and dull gray. I floated in the water as a lifeless pale gray person. They said touching or moving me was scary. My colors changed again after 5 to 10 minutes, according to them. They said I went from pale gray to dark blue, then pale blue, then light brown. They appeared terrified. I grabbed their regulators after inspecting their masks. Both demanded explanations from me on the beach. They could tell something had happened to me, but I wasn't ready to talk about it because I couldn't believe it. I was having trouble figuring it out. I asked Richard to drive us home. We arrived in my car that day. Usually dove early, we had the day. After returning the diving gear, we got on the freeway. Again, questions began. "What happened to you? Tell us what happened." I could barely sit up in the front passenger seat. I felt strange, weak, and tired. I finally told Richard and Ricky what happened to me, but wasn't sure how to explain it. I said they wouldn't believe me if I told them what happened. That concludes Gary's tale. This experience should have moved and inspired you. Please share your thoughts and experiences below. You never know if your words will inspire others to share theirs. Our channel should be a safe place to tell stories. Thanks to everyone for coming today. We value your support, feedback, and enthusiasm. Bringing these amazing stories to light keeps us going. To us,